Hey folks, happy Thursday. We continue our pastor's devotional using our May prayer calendar from First United Methodist Church, Chula Vista, Thursday, May 20th. And the mission project that we're praying for is the East Asia Happy Children's Home of China. And this project started like so many projects do in the United Methodist Church, and that is that a group of women, lay women, different United Methodist units from churches around a district in right around Tulsa, Oklahoma, began praying. One of them, some of them, somehow became passionate about the plight of unadoptable children in China. And so they began praying, and for years they prayed about this, and they began raising some money. And then in 2005, they built this orphanage. 2006, they opened it and dedicated it. And now there's about 25 kids a year who are living in that orphanage. They call them, they're trying to reach kids who are unadoptable, which in China, that oftentimes it has to do with gender. So girls are less adoptable than boys, but also most of them are older. People are wanting to adopt a little baby, and kids fall through the cracks, and now they're older, and so they have a home for these older kids. They go to school, they have Bible studies weekly, they have summer camps, they've graduated a number of kids that are going on to post high school education, just doing great work with these kids and giving them an opportunity in the future to these kids who otherwise would have been homeless or just sort of stuck in this system. And so just a wonderful work that's happening there. On one of the websites, when I was looking at the information, it had a passage from 1 John chapter 3, verse 18. So open in your Bibles to 1 John. It's way in the back of your New Testament. As you're finding it, and it's really short. So there's a 1 John, which is only about 3 pages. There's a second letter of John, which is about half a page, and a third letter of John, which is also about half a page. So as you're finding that, it might take you a minute. Let me just explain the John name in the New Testament. So there's the Gospel of John, written by someone by the name of John. There is these letters that are written by someone by the name of John, different than the gospel writer John. Then there is Revelations, which is written by an author by the name of John of Patmos, different than the other two. And the way things worked in those days is that so John was an apostle of Jesus, and then John, that apostle, he goes and he starts some churches and he evangelizes some communities, and those people who learn from him begin to call themselves John Christians. They trace their Christianity through this apostle John. And so over here, these people might call themselves sort of Pauline Christians because they learned through Paul, and these are Petrine folks who learned from Peter, Johannine who learned from John, Lucan who learned from Luke. So there's all these different names. And it was common in those days that one would use the pseudonym of your teacher or your leader to write something. So for example, if I was going to write a sort of horror novel, right? I could write it in my name, so written by Pastor Brian, or I could say written by Stephen King. And what's going to be read more? Well, the one that's written by Stephen King, or the one that's said to be written by Stephen King. So if I was a student of Stephen King, sort of lived in that world, studied from him, learned the art from him, then when I wrote, I would say written by Stephen King, even though it wasn't. That's the way the world in antiquity worked. And so there's all kinds of writings from John that people have learned Christianity from the Apostle John, and they write in his name as if to give him the credit for what they're saying and they're doing, and understanding that if it's his name, it carries more weight. And so that's very likely the reason why some of these, some of the New Testament writings are in those key names, like John or like Peter. So, anyways, that was a long explanation. Sorry for that. John, 1 John, chapter 3, verse 18. Little children, let us love not in word or speech, but in truth and action. Little children, let us not love in word or speech, but in truth and action. And if you read through, take a moment, read through these three letters. It'll only take you a few minutes. What you'll discover is that this author is sort of in a battle. And there's people who have come into this church and they've begun talking about, well, maybe Jesus isn't really God's son. Maybe he's not really divine. Maybe he's just a good prophet. And they begin talking about sort of rules and regulations for being a Christian. And then these letters remind the people, your faith is proven by what you do, by your behavior. So everyone's questioning, do we do this? Do we eat this? Do we not eat this? Who's Jesus? And John says, look, just love one another deeply as God loved you, as Jesus gave the example. And that is where truth will be found. It's a good message in even 2,000 years later in our world today, when lots of different directions that the world calls us to. But we know that God always calls us to love deeply others just the way God has loved us. I pray that's what your day is filled with on this day. God bless.